My name is Andrea Gabriel. I'm a writer and a scribbler of assorted projects. And because of those endeavors, I've had the chance to meet some amazing, fantastic people in my life. And so I'm beginning a series of interviews of some of the most amazing people I have ever met. And I would like to start with numero uno, Laura Kalpakian, my friends, a fantastic writer. She's written many novels, many short stories that have been released to great acclaim. And she is my friend and was willing to do this interview.
Yes.
We are here to celebrate the re-release of her book, Fair Augusto and Other Stories, which was originally released in 1986 by Grey Wolf and was just re-released by Paint Creek Press in June of 2023. Laura, welcome.
Thank you.
It's good to have you here.
Yes, I'm glad to be your numero uno.
I've had so much fun reading the stories in Fair Augusto, and I am so struck by how one person can hold so many completely solid, diverse voices within themselves. I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about how the stories in Fair Augusto came together.
Well, first of all, I do think the capacity, if you want to call it that, to write about a swath of experience outside my own is one of my great strengths as a writer.
I would agree.
And so Fair, well, I always just call it Fair. It came together in this way. So I published my first novel with Little Brown and Company, and then I was working on the novel that became These Latter Days. And in the middle of that, my editor at Little Brown, who was the main vein there, died.
Oh, no.
And so that kind of ended that path. And I felt I couldn't really move forward until somehow I found print for These Latter Days, which took me like 8 years. But in the meantime, so I wasn't working on any other novels, but in the meantime, I was writing a lot of short stories, and I felt that it was actually not even short stories, long stories, but I felt that this was a really fertile period for me in terms of the stories. And it was like I kept meeting them, if you will. And so the other thing too was that, as I wrote in the recent blog post on my website, laurakalpakian.com, I've always loved the long story. I loved it as a reader and I love it as a writer. And I kind of feel like that's my great forte as a writer. But they are impossible to publish. I mean, and of course, now even more so. And so some of these stories I was writing, I was casting them exactly toward like the commercial market in terms of length. Mm-hmm. And that was another thing, that I had this idea about my career as a writer that I basically took like from F. Scott Fitzgerald. I mean, that you would write these novels, and then you would make money by publishing a lot of short stories, And so I was publishing, after the novel came out, I was publishing in a lot of literary mags, which I wasn't making any money, but I was publishing. So that was fine. But I still had no place for these long pieces. And so that was kind of how Fair Augusto came together. And it was, I brought them all under one canopy, and I anchored either, and I've done this with most of my books of fiction, shorter fiction, is that I anchor either end of the book with the two strongest stories in it. And so Fair is at the end of this, and then Veterans Day is at the beginning.
Yeah, Veterans Day is a real stunner, by the way.
And that's, so that was how I did it. So I put these together, and I just thought, and I don't remember how I stumbled on reading somewhere about Grey Wolf Press, which was brand new, at the time. And I was still living in California. I wasn't even living up here in Washington, and they were a Washington press. And so I put the book together, again, looking for a kind of swath of time periods and voices, and I wanted it to have texture, you might say. And I sent it to the then editor and publisher there at Grey Wolf. And this is back in the day when you had to send the whole book and self-addressed envelopes so they could send it back to you. I mean, it would cost you a fortune. People who can do things electronically, you can't even imagine in the old days, like my postage costs would sometimes run to $700 just doing things back and forth,
Isn't it amazing? And my own experience was that they would run over it with a tractor before they mailed it back to you with a no thank you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And they would eat their ham sandwich while they were reading it.
Right, little mayonnaise dribbles all over.
A little mayonnaise and not a little and a couple of coffee stains too,
So you couldn't know how easy they've got it.
Yeah. So anyway, I sent it off, and I didn't hear, and then a whole bunch of other stuff happened in my life, and eventually, time passed, and every now and then I'd write and go, oh yeah, wait, you still have my book, but my own life was full of such upheaval that I really couldn't chart it, you might say. And then I moved to Washington, and one day, it'd been like a year or so. They never returned it, but they also never replied. And so at that time, they were over in Port Townsend. So I gathered up my kids and we took a day trip to Port Townsend. This was on a Saturday. And we found the address and we walked up and down in front of the address, chanting Buddhist chants and saying nice things about Fair A. And why did, would they do this? And finally, 2 years later, 2 years passed, and he writes back words to the effect of, I love this, I want to publish it. I took your manuscript to Europe with me. I think 300 pages you hauled around, and he did. So by the time the book came out, Grey Wolf had moved to Minneapolis, where they still are, and he had gone. I don't know what's happened to him, but it was one of their early books, not the first by any means. It was one of their early books. So I was always very proud of that. And they did a beautiful job with it. Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of how I gathered up a lot of the stories that I had been working on, most of which I had not been able to publish elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad that they did publish it so that we get to read it. So just to fill people in, because this book was published before the time of, Microsoft Word and whatnot, it was originally typed on a typewriter. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah.
And then sent in, and then they typeset it. And in order to get this re-released, we had to do optical text recognition on the text, which then has to be proofread again by you multiple times. Right. And I'm curious, going through that process of reading and rereading these stories from several decades ago in your life, I'm curious your perspective on how you think they've changed over time. Are there aspects of the book that you see differently now? And how was that experience for you to revisit these stories?
That was a shock to me.
Was it?
It was a shock to me at how much, in rereading, because generally speaking, once my work is in print, I don't revisit it. I just don't. Yeah, and part of the reason is that I am just an inveterate reviser. And part of the reason I don't read it in print is I look at it and I go, oh, I could have done that better, or I should have changed this or something. So I just think it's in print. It's like your kid has left home. Do you know what I mean? Got to think about the others here. So yes, many years had passed since I had read any of these pieces, and I was shocked at how poignant they still were to me. I could only read one a day, and it not just left me wrung out. The emotions that had gone into the stories. I was just, it's like they were all still fresh.
Well, and you're not alone in that. When I received my advanced reader copy, I was like, okay, I'll just read through these. And I got my iced tea and I sat out in the hammock ready to just rip through these. And I read the first one, which I think was Veterans Day. And it slayed me. And I just thought, well, I can't read something else right now. I need to go for a walk and think about it. And it's how true. I can't read more than one a day just because they are so full. These stories are complete and full. You feel as if you've embodied an entire other life when you read them.
So that was, I'm delighted to hear you say that, because I mean, clearly that's the goal that any writer has, that the reader is so immersed that they look up and they have to decompress back into the real world, right.
Rejoin their own lives for a minute.
So that makes me happy.
Masterfully done. Do you feel like your style or approach when you were reading these, do you feel like your writing style has changed since then? Were you tempted to just take out whole swaths and replace them with other lines, or were you able to just?
I did a little bit of diddling around with it. And one thing I noticed that was shocking to me was that so I had a big dust up with Grey Wolf about the copy edit on this. And whoever, and I have no idea who this person was, but whoever did the copy edit on it, they were screwing around with my punctuation and it was like being copy edited by Microsoft Word. It goes, that's a fragment. And you just feel like flipping them off. Dude, I mean it to be a fragment, or it wouldn't be a fragment. So I had to, and I was living in England at the time, and I had to stop what I was doing there and address myself to this. And then I had to mail it back to the States, and I was really annoyed with them. And I just said, this is how I want it, yes, these are fragments, and duh, I'm the author. And then when the book came out with Grey Wolf, there was a whole paragraph that repeated. In the title story, in Fair Augusto, it wasn't like the peak of the emotion or anything, but I thought, what is that? I just read that, So I did take that out, believe me.
Yes, I'm sure there were some.
But I would say that my paragraphs have got to be shorter in the years that I've been writing, which I suppose is a good thing. When I look back at my early work, I see long paragraphs, and has my style changed that much? I guess I'm more aware of style than I used to be. And I'm certainly much more aware of transitions than I used to be.
Well, one thing I've noticed in your writing is you do sometimes very creative transitions. I read a piece of yours recently that had a really great method of actually not even putting a period at the end of the paragraph and just moving into the next one, which just creates sort of rhythm and swell of experience as you're reading. It's like it's just sort of falling over you as you read the words.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that authors can, as a writer, I don't like to be shackled to you have to have, independent clauses on either side of this sort of, what I mean? I think you can use punctuation creatively, and I very often do. But that is the kind of thing that drives a proofer or a copy editor bonkers. They think, oh, you left off the punctuation. And then, yes, I left off the punctuation because I want your eye not to stop there. I want you to go right down, to the next thing. So yeah, I mean, I think creative punctuation is one of the very fun things about being a writer.
Well, it sounds like the critics agreed with you. I mean, you want to share a little bit about some of the reviews?
Yeah,
Mhm.
the book got very nice reviews. New York Times, and although, you know, nothing is the only real review that the author wants to see is, this is the best book ever written. You know, and short of that, you know, you have to think, oh God, I have to have my Irish whiskey here before I can read this, you know. And they're and critics are always going to go, me about this, that, the other. But the book got very nice critical reviews. It won the Penn West Award for short fiction that year. Ms. Magazine picked it up as one of the best books of the year. So I was very happy about that. And it gave me a lot of momentum. So this was like 86, 87, this book came out, that I had another whole book of short fiction all ready to go, which became Dark Continent. And I was able to publish that then in 89. So it was kind of a shoe-in. And again, in Dark Continent, I anchored it with the two strongest stories in the book. And then some of it had been published, but most of it hadn't. I mean, publishing short fiction is always, not always, I mean, it wasn't iffy for F. Scott Fitzgerald because there was 100 venues. Everybody published fiction. And now the paying venues are down to like 2, you know what I mean?
Right.
So,
but still, I'm curious, as a writer of these very long fiction, frequently, and just a short story, does it make a nice break for you in your writing process? I'm thinking, you know, for me, a novel might take 2 or 3 years, and you don't get that reward of completion. But here, you can knock off a short story and be like, phew, a little break. You sort of.
No, I do. A lot of times, like when I was working on when I was working on TLD, these stories gave me a respite from that, you know. And I must say, like at any given time, I might have, I don't know, 2 or 3 things under construction, you know. And so if one of them ceases to be rewarding, let's say, you know, okay, I'm going to move over here for a while and dick around with that and see what happens. And a lot of times, you know, I'll work and work and work, and then I'll walk away from it, and it'll come to me, you know, and I leave myself a note, you know, to do that.
That's such a major part of the creative process. Is sometimes the breakthrough comes when you focus your attention just to the
elsewhere
of what it is.
And it's almost, in a way, it's almost like dreaming, where when you dream, you are able to take stuff that is, you know, roiling there beneath the surface that you can't articulate, and you turn it somehow into scenes when you're unconscious, basically. And so when you walk away from the work that's at hand, and say, okay, you know, whatever, then it's like your unconscious has a chance to mull it over and you can return to it. But I do love, I mean, I really love writing these long loopy stories and that roam around and come back. And of course, there's almost no place to publish those anymore, except in a book of stories, you know. A book of short fiction, right?
Well, I'm curious, you know, in 1986, when this was originally published, you know, it was just a different world, obviously. I'm curious, though, as you reread them, if you feel like there's any themes that emerged in these stories that are just as relevant today.
You know, I think that the thematics of these stories remain relevant. I mean, yes, the details are different. I mean, in one story, the narrator refers to like the reams of computer paper that this scientist, you know, brought with him, and you know, that kind of thing. So I mean, obviously that's, and you know, people talk on the phone long distance, that sort of thing. So the mechanics of the day-to-day life that are presented, yes, those are different. And I didn't diddle around with those at all when I reread them. I mean, for instance, with a computer paper, I thought about taking that out. And then I thought, no, I'm just going to leave it. That was the story, and that was, but I think that thematically, I think these stories I think they're still powerful, and I think they still have the power to, move readers and make readers think. I mean, I would say that thematically, my work is, the sort of general canopy over my work would be the power of the past. Whether you're shackled to it or you're trying to free from it. I wouldn't say that all my characters are haunted by any means, but they all, they have to grapple with the past in some way. And I think that most people, as they move along through life, you end up grappling with the past and seeing it anew and afresh. And that can be distressing. It can be amazing, So I think that thematically these stories still have a lot of relevance, and I'm really delighted to see them republished.
Absolutely. I think, well, I think my favorite story that I read was The Land of Lucky Strike, and the experience in the character there, which actually took place several decades before you wrote it.
Right.
Would be just as relevant to the immigrant experience today.
Yes.
And
yes.
It puts the reader in such a state of empathy with that experience,
yes.
Which is important, I believe.
Well, that was loosely modeled on, that character and that experience was loosely modeled on my grandfather.
I wondered.
Yeah. So that has kind of special relevance to me too, Yeah.
Okay, so I, of course, have my favorite, but then I'm curious, did you have a favorite story in the book? Or is that like trying to pick the favorite of your children? Impossible.
I didn't really have a favorite. I had, there were stories that I bled into more, cost me more.
Mm-hmm.
That Land of Lucky Strike had special meaning for me because it was based on my grandfather. And Veterans Day, as I put in a recent blog post, that had special resonance for me. I took some of that out of my brother's experience as a Vietnam War veteran. And so some of them cost me more, and so I think I think it's different for the writer than the reader. I do. Absolutely. I mean, I've often realized, like talking with editors and stuff about books like this, my idea of what is the best story is usually not theirs. I
imagine with such disparate voices,
right?
Something like this, different readers will have different favorites,
right? But I must say, like Grey Wolf, and I would say in general with the books of short fiction that I have published, the editors have never changed the order of the stories that I've put them, because I put a lot of thought into that as well.
I imagine it's like putting out the layer of the order of songs in an album.
Well, that's exactly right. And in fact, back in the day when I published Fair and Dark Continent, and to a lesser extent the Delinquent Virgin, but that was the analogy I always used. You have your hit single, and which is to say, the story that's the most stellar. And I would always try and lead off with that,
Mhm.
And then you have these others that come in and provide like a whole tapestry of experience behind that, both as a listener. And of course, even if you put out an album today, like nobody listens to it like that anymore, you know?
Well, I don't know if many people remember, but yeah, there were always a few songs on the B side that sort of lagged. And I have to say, I did not experience that reading your book.
Oh,
So
good.
now that you
Okay.
stopped there.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
So I'm curious for those who'll be reading Fair Augusto for the first time with this re-release, are there any particular things you'd like them to look out for or make note of, or?
Well, I hope there's no more typos.
Uh,
Because I went over it I went over it many times, and it took me a long time to get this re-release out there. I mean, some of which was just like going in my own life or whatever. But, again, no, I think it's still a relevant book, and I think the thematics are there. And all I would hope is that readers like you would be, moved and have to put the book down and come back to it. I mean, I like shaking people up.
well, you've done it.
Yeah.
So what's next? What are you working on right now? What can readers look forward to in the future?
Well, ironically, I have gone back to an old novella, and I find myself playing around with that. I have no idea what I will do with it, but I know it won't turn into a novel because it already did. This was the original story of These Latter Days. It was called These Latter Days, and I found the typescript original recently, and I was shocked. It was so old that the main character even had a different name,
Wow.
So it was really, and anyway, eventually this became the novel, These Latter Days. And out of that story, one paragraph made it into the novel.
Isn't that crazy how your characters take over and tell you?
Oh, they do. They do. And a lot of times I feel like, sometimes I just feel like I'm going along like in a little boat with my little pins for oars, fishing away. And then suddenly, not that there's a fish that comes up, but some big fucking mermaid jumps in the boat and goes, "You got to tell my story." No, go back. I'm still fishing over. I want a nice little rainbow trout, No, but they just stay in this boat, and they will not get out until you deal with them. And I really do feel like that. I feel a lot of times like these characters are cage rattling me. You must tell my story,
Mm-hmm.
And finally, I
find it. A blob-faced mermaid.
Yeah. And then
do.
they can go back and I mean, Ruth Douglas, who is the central character in TLD, she was like that. I did not even like her very much.
Wow.
She was not congenial to me.
And yet she got I think that's your longest novel, isn't it? That's been published.
I don't know. I think American Cookery might be longer.
Okay.
But she's the character in that as well. That came out of she was central core to my work,
So a character, your favorite person, not your favorite person, but the character that won't let you go.
The character who won't let you go. And so I returned to that. And then I have other work under construction that takes place in Venice, like the story Fair Augusto, that I love to revisit Venice imaginatively. And so I'm looking forward to that, So I always have a bunch of stuff that's kind of like, I keep a list of titles sometimes, and here's a story about Fair. So the story that's called Youth in Asia that was a gaffe that I made in grad school.
Oh, no.
I had never heard the term euthanasia, like mercy killing. And I was teaching in a like freshman comp program. And we were at a meeting of the TAs or something, and well, we're going to give everybody all the students have to write a short essay on euthanasia. And I kept thinking, like, all these people with their Mao haircuts, so lining up in Red Square or something, euthanasia, what does that mean? And when I realized my mistake, I was just horrified, but I thought, there is a title that is just looking for a story.
Absolutely.
And so that was how I had that title, and oh yeah, there's that story. So I have a bunch of titles looking for stories.
Well, didn't Fair Augusto as well come about in a similar way?
Yes, Fair Augusto came about in a similar way. I was in Italy that summer, in August. And I had gone there on the bounty of my first novel selling. And I had this dear friend who was Venetian. She was a grad student at UCSD. That was how I knew her. And she's, oh, come to Venice. And I go, oh, okay. So I went to Venice, and it was just life-changing for me in every way. And so I felt like, one thing, I felt like, oh, I have to come home so that everybody knows that I have been irrevocably changed, and now I am a woman of the world. And so I got my hair permed there, where I didn't speak the language. Oh, it was so awful. And so I had
becoming the first person to ever regret a hair perm, I'm sure.
Yeah. But I'm in a country where I don't speak the language. I don't know what I was thinking. Anyway, so I did look very different, and I had to cut it all off. And anyway, but I also didn't speak Italian. And so there's this holiday in Italy that they've celebrated thousands of years. It predates the Romans, probably, mid-August. And they always call it Fair Augusto, and that's one word. But as an English speaker, I heard two words, Fair Augusto. And that was how I always thought of it. And then I connected that somehow in my mind with like these images on Roman coins, like, Augustus and so on. And that
he was very fair,
yeah,
obviously.
Yeah, and beauty, and so it always has resonated for me and actually, to this day, I always note and celebrate Fair Augusto on August 15th, even if I'm all by myself, A
little glass of limoncello or something.
Yeah, but the resonant line in that story for me, one of them is that it's toward the end, it's, she's fair Augusto. And so, but like a lot of my books, everybody I know, and, we always just call it Fair A, just like TLD is just, yeah. So, they're like family members. They just come to have their own names.
I have this picture of in my mind of you in your kitchen, Christmas, the family all around, but everyone else wandering around too, all the characters in and out. And commenting on the stew. And that's how I imagine your life going.
I just feel sometimes like, yes, I have, wonderful friends, and I have a wonderful family now, but I also feel like a lot of times I've spent much of my life, certainly my adult life, in the company of people I've made up, and sometimes they are, when they're through with me, they're through with me, and that's okay,
Yeah.
But they just kind of anyway, I'm grateful that here, I'll tell you. So long ago, right when I was working on my first novel, I think. So I was living in California, and I had this dream. I had been writing, I've been teaching myself to write because I was a grad student in a literature program, and you would never, never, never admit in a million years that you were trying to write a short story or a novel or anything like that. People would just sneer you right out of the deconstruction tent, and beat you with or roll on barge or something. So I had this dream, and it was in front of the house where I was living, and this bus pulls up, and all these people get off the bus, and I had this tiny little house, and I just looked at them, and I was so happy. I said, "Oh, you've all come here to be characters," and they didn't talk to me. They just walked in the house,
And they've never left.
Yeah, they never left. And I still have dreams like that. Only sometimes I say, "Go away, go away," But
Wow.
yeah, oh, you've all come here to be characters, and yeah.
I'm lucky for the rest of us.
Yeah.
So we get
Well, I
to
hope
learn
so,
all about them. Yeah, I'm in
You know.
particular looking forward to the Venice story when that
Yes.
comes.
Yeah, that's going to be fun.
Well, thank you so much for taking time to talk to me.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate this. I'm so happy to be the first one on your podcast.
Well, we'll see how this goes.
Yeah.
A learning experience. But for those of you who need a reminder, that the book is Fair Augusto and Other Stories by Laura Kalpakian. It's available anywhere books are sold, on Amazon, your local bookstore, Barnes and Noble. Gosh, I think I even saw it on the Walmart website. So there you go.
Woohoo! Walmart, okay.
You get the big time when you hit Walmart.
Yeah. All right.